Welcome back, everyone, to week 2. Last week, we talked about what marketing is at its core, creating value for customers, and then capturing value in return. We looked at Nike and how a mission statement can shape everything a company does. This week, we're going in 2 directions at once, and both of them are essential before you can build any real marketing strategy. First, we are going to look outward at the world in which your customer lives, the forces that shape their environment, their spending, their culture, even the technology they use. And secondly, we are going to go inward, into the customer's head, to ask what actually drives them to buy. These 2 things together, understanding the environment and understanding the customer, are the foundation of every strategic decision that we make in this course. All right, so chapter 3 introduces something that the textbook calls the macro environment. And these are large forces outside of any individual company that shape what is possible in the market. You cannot control them, but you can track them, anticipate them, and design a strategy around them. The book groups them into 6 categories. I have them listed here on the slide. So the first is demographic forces. So that is who your customers are, like how old they are, how diverse they are, their family structures, all of that. Secondly, we have economic forces. This would be their spending powers, inflation, recession, all of those things would factor into that. Then there's natural forces. So resource constraints, climate, sustainability pressures. You also have technological forces. That's new platforms, new tools, new ways that customers can find and buy things. And then you have political and social forces. So this is regulations that change, legislation, cause-related expectations, all of those would be in that category. And then lastly, we have cultural forces. So those are shifting values, what people believe about themselves, and their relationship to consumption. Now here's what the textbook says, and I want you to really hear this. Marketers must be able to be trend trackers and opportunity seekers in a company. So that's not just nice to have, that is the job. The companies that see what's coming and respond early get a competitive advantage. The ones that ignore what is happening in all of these categories will easily get disrupted and not be successful. So let me give you an example that is not in the chapter, but it illustrates this perfectly. Patagonia. When cultural forces shifted in the late 2000s and the early 2010s towards a more environmental consciousness, many outdoor brands made some incremental moves towards sustainability. They might have added a recycled material here or there, or a green line. Patagonia went way further. They ran an ad that said, "Don't buy this jacket." They encouraged customers to not buy new products they didn't need. They built a repair program. They changed the legal structure of their company to lock in environmental mission permanently. So this is a company that read the cultural and natural environment, took a strong proactive stance, and turned it into a brand position that is now genuinely difficult for competitors to copy. That is what it looks like to use environmental scanning strategically rather than just reactively. So chapter 5 gives us a model of consumer buyer behavior. And I want us to look at this diagram together for a moment. There's an even more detailed one in your textbook that you can reference. But at the top here, we have all the marketing stimuli that's coming in, labeled as environment. This is the brand's message, prices, product design, where it's sold, plus environmental forces, the economic climate, cultural norms, what friends are doing. All of that enters into what we could even call as the buyer's black box. Inside that black box, 2 things happen. The buyer's characteristics shape how they interpret and respond to everything that comes in. And then the buyer's decision process does its work. Out the other side comes a purchase response, or no purchase, or a search for more information. That black box is the marketing problem. We can see what goes in. We can observe what comes out. We cannot see directly is what happened inside. And that's what Chapter 5 is all about. 4 categories of factors influence what happens in that black box. Cultural factors, which are the deepest and most persistent. Social factors, meaning groups, family, and increasingly social media influencers. Personal factors like age, a life stage, income, lifestyle, and then psychological factors including motivation, perception, learning, and beliefs. Now, here's a question I want you to think about before we move on. Think about the last thing you bought that you genuinely didn't need. So I'm not talking about groceries or food or something that was broken or you had to replace. Maybe a piece of clothing, a subscription, or a gadget, something that was a want and not a need. Now, which of those 4 factors drove that purchase? Was it something you saw in your social group? A lifestyle aspiration? Was it a belief that you had about yourself, of who you wanted to be? Hold on to that answer, because the forum this week is going to ask us to trace that thinking with a specific product. Now, the case study that opens Chapter 5 is about Weight Watchers. And I want to take a few minutes on it because it's one of the most honest and complicated brand stories in the textbook. Weight Watchers built decades of business on a model centered on behavior change. Community meetings, a point system that rewarded mindful eating, the idea that real lasting change comes from building new habits over time. And for a huge segment of customers, the model worked and created deep loyalty. Then Ozempic and Wegovy arrived. Weight loss medications that produce dramatic results a lot faster than any lifestyle program. Suddenly, a segment of customers had a new alternative that addressed the same need recognition, the desire to manage weight, but through a completely different information search and evaluation process. So Weight Watchers made a decision. They acquired a telemedicine company and began prescribing weight loss medications. Now they are trying to do both things at once: the community-driven lifestyle brand and the medication platform. Here is why this matters for Chapter 5. The company is essentially serving 2 different buyer decision processes at the same time. Traditional members go through a deliberate process that involves community, accountability, and slow behavior change. That is a complex buying behavior, high involvement, significant perceived differences between approaches. New customers who are drawn by medications are moving through a faster process, more information-driven, more focused on results. Same brand, but radically different buyer journeys. Now, the question the book doesn't answer, because honestly it's still playing out, is whether one brand can serve both journeys without losing what made the original journey meaningful. Weight Watchers filed for bankruptcy in 2025 and then reorganized. The community and medication tracks are still both live. When you apply the 5-stage buyer decision process to your own brand this week, this is the kind of layering I want you to look for. The decision process is rarely as clean as a textbook diagram. Real customers are messy. Their needs evolve. The market changes and disrupts. Your job as a marketer is to understand which stage that they are in and what is influencing them there. All right, so Chapter 4 talks about the marketing information ecosystem, which is the systems and processes that companies use to gather the intelligence about customers and markets. And this is where this new edition of the textbook really is helpful, because it's honest about how much AI has changed this. The Capital One case that opens chapter 4 describes a company that calls itself a technology company disguised as a bank. Their AI system, called Eno, monitors individual spending patterns, detects fraud in real time, sends reminders about bills, and generates insights that Capital One then uses to design new products. The loop between the customer behavior and the company response is nearly instantaneous. Traditional marketing research, such as surveys, focus groups, annual market studies, is not obsolete, but it's no longer sufficient on its own. The companies that are winning in customer intelligence are the ones combining traditional research with real-time behavioral data and AI analysis. But here's what chapter 4 makes clear, and what I want you to hold on to for your final project. The value of marketing information is not in the data itself. It is in the question that you bring to that data. Capital One does not just collect everything. They are obsessed with making the right question. What does the customer actually need right now, at this moment in their financial life? As you build your customer profile for your brand this week, that is the question I want you to be asking. Not what do we know about this customer, but what does this customer actually need? And where is the brand's current strategy missing it? All right, so that's week 2. Your readings are chapters 3, 4, and 5. Chapter 5 is on consumer behavior, and it's the heaviest chapter this week. It is also the one that connects most directly to the forum and the assignment, so I recommend reading that one more thoroughly. For chapters 3 and 4, I would start a practice of being able to skim material to really get an understanding of what it's about. So making sure you're looking at the definitions and the core material and some of the case studies that are highlighted, but you don't need to do a full cover-to-cover read of 3 and 4 unless you want to. Your forum is a written post this week. You are going to trace a real recent purchase you made through the 5-stage buyer decision process from chapter 5. And it has to be a purchase that you actually made, not a hypothetical. The point is to practice seeing your behavior as a marketer would see it. The assignment is your environmental scan. So 2 macro environmental forces affecting your chosen brand. Remember, we're doing parts of that final project all along so that that final piece of work is going to be a lot easier to finish. You are going to describe each one of those forces specifically, and then you're going to explain the impact it has on the brand or its market and recommend a strategic response. Instructions are in Canvas, and AI is permitted for research on this one, but there is a required reflection after you use AI. I really want to teach you how to thoughtfully use AI. In the business world and marketing, AI is definitely a part of the workflow, but using it in a correct manner is going to make you much more effective. For your ungraded scaffolding this week, draft a consumer profile of your brand's target customer. 5 to 8 sentences is good. So who are they? What motivates their purchase? What environmental forces are most relevant to them right now? This becomes section B in your final project. So that is all for week 2. If you have any questions, please reach out.